So we're going to jump into this. Ideally, when I'd planned these presentations, this one was more likely to be the first one, and then the ones that all you who are in the layer session heard was going to be the second one. It didn't work out that way, so you guys will just have to mix and match in your minds. For everyone who is on the broiler and turkey side, welcome in. This is intended to complement what Dr. Schween Lardner was presenting on turkey lighting and on broiler lighting. And so hopefully for all of you, this is a nice refresher overview on lighting. If you have any questions, talk to me afterwards in the hallway or raise your hand. Because I know we're a little bit behind schedule, I won't linger too long on this because we want to be able to get to all the speakers here. My goal today is to go over three basic areas. First of all is just understanding light. Second is measuring it. And then last is understanding a little bit what chickens see. Now, I am going to defer to Dr. Darren Karcher. He did a much, much better presentation than I ever could in terms of what chickens see and the questions that we still have on that. So I'm really going to minimize that section, and you all can refer to Dr. Karcher and the excellent team at Purdue University for that. What I want to emphasize here, again, we're all dealing with light. We're used to seeing light. We have light in this room. We have light when we go outside, or at least for a little while longer. Light is just a portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. And so we talk about ultraviolet light, visible light, and then infrared light. And those are pretty well set, but it differs into what we can see and what chickens can see. What's more important for us is understanding the light environment. One of the cool things that we have about working with chickens is that we can modify the lighting environment for chickens to maximize production and to help manage behavior. And we do this by duration. We step lights down for pullets. We increase them for layers. We do this with intensity. We're still learning a lot about how intensity works for chickens and what's the best one and what do our auditors say versus what the chickens need. We're still working on that. And then the last one is wavelength. This is really, I think, the next big area. Dr. Karcher was looking at some of the different wavelengths. A lot of the lighting companies are looking at how we can use wavelengths. As we get into lights that are able to switch colors and do it at different times throughout the day, we're really learning what we can do with these lights and how to maximize the production and the welfare for chickens. Chromaticity. This is important, because when you look at a light bulb, this gives you a general idea of what's in that bulb. Now, I won't tell you the exact spectrum, but it'll tell you whether it's relatively warm or relatively cool. And you can tell that. So just looking around, what do you think the lights in this room are? Is it warm or cool? I hear warm and cool. Okay, we got some work to do here. So these lights are warm. I measured it with my spectrometer earlier. It's about 2700 K, so that'd be right in the back. What do you think the light coming in through the window right now or through the skylight in the back is? Cool. Basic, easy. We got warm, we got cool, and that's a good way to look at light. Is it warm or is it cool? Now that we have that kind of set, I want to show you the spectra of some different light sources so we understand how different all of these different lights are. The first one to start off with is the sun. Always good to look at the sun, the original light source, the original thing that chickens use to lay. So the sun has a lot of blue, it has a lot of red, a lot of green, a lot of full spectrum everything. The one challenge for this is when you see, if you go into Walmart, you go into Menards, and you pick up a nice box of LED lights that say sunlight on them, and you're like, oh, this is going to be a nice warm light because it says sunlight. It's not right. Those are cool lights because if you actually look at the chromaticity of sunlight, it's more towards the 5000 area because there's so much blue in it. And so sunlight bulbs we don't want to use for our laying hens. We want to use something that's a little bit warmer. We need that red spectrum in it. Sunlight's a little different, and you'll see that later. What happens during dawn or dusk? When the sun's setting, all of a sudden we have a lot more red spectrum. That makes sense. We've got sunsets, sunrises, they're nice and red and pink, and so we know that that's a little different. For anyone who has curtain-sided houses or birds that go outside during the sunrise and sunset, chickens will be seeing that difference in the light spectrum. What happens when it's cloudy outside, like right now? The clouds are going to block a lot of that red spectrum that's coming through, and we're going to end up with just a lot of the blues and greens that make up the just dark gray that makes you happy that you're inside today instead of outside in this windy, snowy weather. And then we have the difference between sun and shade, and I just wanted to show that to you. So this is a snapshot from one of our spectrometers, and this is in lux, but in foot candles, it would roughly be about 6,500 foot candles of light. So it's really bright outside, and this is in the afternoon, so it gets over 10,000 foot candles outside. So for any of you who have outside chicken houses or houses that have windows in them, sunlight is a lot brighter than the 1 to 2 foot candles we normally operate in our chicken houses. And you can see that's that nice full spectrum. So if we just move over to the left, right behind this tree, all of a sudden we drop down by a factor of 10. And so all of a sudden we're in the 600s. It's still very bright. It's much darker than it was before, but 600 foot candles is a lot dimmer than 6,000. And so just wanted to show that to you because all of these different light environments are important in understanding where it comes from. Now for a few different kinds of bulbs. We're starting to get to the point here where there might be some people in this room who have not seen an incandescent bulb in a chicken house. But for a lot of us, when we started our career, it was either an incandescent bulb or a fluorescent bulb. And so this is the original artificial light that we had, and this is a great light for chickens. The problem is it's a bad light for basically everything else. And so you can see that there's not much blue spectrum, but there's a lot of red spectrum, and there's a lot of heat that comes out of these bulbs. So all the red we need for stimulating production, but we don't really use these anymore. So then the poultry industry moved to compact fluorescent bulbs. Now, from an energy efficiency point of view, this was a lot better than what an incandescent bulb is. It used maybe 10% of the energy. And so that was good. But the way that a fluorescent bulb is made, you've got these different phosphors in there that make up the different colors. The problem is chickens can see that. Chickens can see these individual lines of color, and chickens didn't really like it. When the birds were in cages, it was one thing. They could jump around a little bit, but it wouldn't really create too much of an issue. When we started putting birds cage-free and we tried to put fluorescent bulbs in there, it did not work very well. And so fortunately, we've been able to move to LED bulbs. If we'd had to go to a cage-free system 15, 20 years ago, it would have been a lot more difficult managing it with just fluorescent bulbs. So look very closely on this warm CFL, and then I'm going to move to the cold CFL. And you can see it's in the exact same spot. It's just there's a little bit more blue, a little bit more green, and a little less red. And so it's the same phosphors, just different combinations of them. Now we have our LED bulbs, and again, there's a little bit of with all the new LED bulbs on the market, there's a lot of different options, and we're going to talk about some of those multi-channel options later. But if you go and buy a regular warm LED bulb, if you measure the lights that are in this room, it's going to look exactly like that. So a little peak of blue that's typical in pretty much any LED bulb, and then a nice amount of blue or green, yellow, and going into the orange and red. For any chicken, this is a really good light spectrum. And any of your standard LED bulbs will look pretty much like this. For a laying hen, it'll be great. And if you can dim it really well, even better. For cool LEDs, again, you can see it has that typical blue peak right around 440 nanometers. And then the yellow and the red is just a little bit lower. Can you use this for laying hens? It's not going to kill them, but you're not going to get nearly the amount of red spectrum you need to really try to get chickens to come in to lay. And so that's why we recommend this only for underneath a system to try to move birds around so they don't lay there, or use them for pullet houses. I know a few people here use curtains, and depends what colors your curtains are as well. That influences the light environment inside the house. This is one farm that I went to. It's the same farm, and they were trying different color curtains. On the blue side, you can see the light intensity is much lower. It's around 10, 11 foot candles. On the yellow one, it was almost 400 foot candles. And so two very different environments. On one of them, it blocked out all the red, which on one hand isn't great because we need them to lay, but on the other hand, there wasn't nearly as much mortality because the light intensity was a lot lower. And so really, if you have the option, my choice is always to use a black curtain. I'd rather block out the light if I can and control it rather than have all that light come in or use a colored side. So it's not ideal, but it's one of the things we do see in a lot of poultry houses, even up here in the Midwest. Measuring light. We talked a lot about measuring light in the last presentation, but I did just want to talk about some of the little things. We've been going back and forth between foot candles and lux here. It's really the same thing, and roughly 10 lux is 1 foot candle. You can do the math if you want to make it exactly right, but given the variability in light intensities, roughly 10 to 1 is what you need to know. The most important component of light intensity changes depending on how far away from the light source you are, and that's what we're trying to show here. And that's important because when you're measuring light, if you measure it here versus here, if you measure it here, it's going to be a higher light intensity because you're closer to your light source. And so just remember that when you're in your chicken houses doing the measurements, is that for good or for bad, the closer to the light source you are, the higher it's going to get. The other thing, when you're measuring your light intensity, you always want the light meter pointed directly at your light source. A lot of light meters are directional and they only take light in a limited range. So you want to aim it directly at the light source because that will give the indication of what the birds are actually seeing at that level. I had this question for the group earlier, and we had a gentleman over here who guessed the light intensity in this room exactly. I don't see him right here. Where'd he go, Joe? Okay, so we got a fresh group. Does anyone know, for anyone who wasn't in the layer section, can anyone guess what the light intensity in this room is? In foot candles. Throw some numbers out for me. 30. We got 30. Any other guesses? 6. Okay. 3. Okay, good. We got a nice range. This worked a lot better, Eric, than the last one. When I measured it was between 21 and 22 foot candles in this room. It's really hard for humans to measure light. Sometimes, I don't know if this gentleman got lucky or he was testing the light before just to make sure that it was okay for humans. But would this be too bright or too dim for a chicken house? We have a too bright. I'm going to say depends where. If it's in an aviary system and you've got a tube light running down in the water line right next to it, you're probably going to be at 40 foot candles because the light's right there. And that's okay because you want it bright enough. If you're in the aisle and we go in there and there's 22 foot candles, Darren, is that too bright? Yeah. Then it's too bright. So it all depends. So understanding light intensity and how you measure it's important. The other thing is our eyes lie to us. So this is one of the grandparent houses that'd be the grandparents of all the brown birds that you have on the ground here. And so this is a pen of Rhode Island red birds, and then this is a pen of leghorns. Which pen do you think is brighter? Is it this one or this one? A or B? Same. Very good. It is the same. It's just that the red feathers absorb all that extra light. And so if we're going in there, we need to make sure, again, that our eyes aren't fooling us, that we use an actual light meter to make sure. And this is what it was, but it's all just another reminder. Now, how many people here have a spectrometer versus a light meter? Anyone have a spectrometer? Raise your hand. Gabrielle, you're gonna... Gabrielle works for a lighting company. I hope she would raise her hand there. So we really, it's difficult with all the new lights that we have. Regular light meters don't work very well, especially if you are moving more towards the blue or more towards the red. And so they're really expensive. You can see one of these is about $2,000. There's other options on the market, but they're all pretty expensive. But if you have different lighting environments, it's best to have a spectrometer because I'll actually measure the light intensity instead of basically taking a guess for lights that are in the red or in the blue. This is especially important if you're being held to a standard and your auditors are saying, you haven't reached 1 foot candle and you need to be able to say, well, with the spectrums that we have in here, we do believe we're at a foot candle, but that light meter is not measuring it. This is just an example of one system that I was working with all the different lights. There are 4 different kinds of lights that we had in there, and if you're using a regular light meter, you never would have been able to get any kind of consistency. This is a very common light meter that we've used. I'm sure some of you have something from X-Tech. They're a really good one. They disinfect easily. I went to a farm that had multiple of these, and we went through and we used those 3 light meters and then used the spectrometer just to calibrate against it. And this one says it will measure LEDs, and it'll measure different spectrums of LEDs. What ends up happening is they just take a multiplication factor in there. It's measuring the exact same light, but it's just multiplying it by a different number to try to guess what it is. And so you can see those measurements in lux are all over the place, and especially different than the spectrometer. And so if you're using this for your audit, it might say you're too low, and you might have to bring the lights up, which might be bad for your chickens. So make sure you're using the right tool for that, so your spectrometer or so your light intensity readings are as accurate as you can get them. There we go. Now we have a section called What Do Chickens See? Why is this important to us? Chickens have the same 5 senses that we do. They've got taste, which we think is not very good. They've got smell, which is poorly researched. There is some indication that chickens have a better sense of smell than we might give them credit for, but we really don't manage anything based off of chicken smell. Their sense of touch, which is pretty good. They like touching things with their beak, with their feet. Their hearing, which is pretty good, and then their sight. Now, Dr. Karcher talked about how far they can see. We know that they can see a lot of spectrums. We know that, or we think, based off of the research, that chickens really can only see clearly a couple feet in front of them, but they do use their eyes for a lot. They use it to look for food. They use it to look for mates, to stay away from predators. There's a lot of things that chickens use their eyes for. And the way that we light our barns will either help or sometimes hurt the situation and the behavior. So I'm going to jump through this one. One of the fun facts that we found about chicken eyes is chicken eyes weigh approximately 7.5% to 8% of their body weight, whereas human eyes are only about 1%. So it is, if you've ever opened a chicken skull and taken the eye out, it's amazing how much the eye takes up of the head. And so chickens use their eyes a lot, and that's a really important feature for them. Chickens can also see UV light. I put in here the chickens have 4 cones. They also have an extra cone that can detect motion versus what humans can see. And I'll let Dr. Karcher get into this a lot more. I won't explain this one too much. But it just goes to show that chickens have a slightly wider range of vision than humans do and can see a little bit more sharply, especially into the ultraviolet area. And just to put it into kind of a picture, the dotted line is what humans see, and the straight line is what chickens see. And so you can see chickens have a slightly wider range. Now this does come with some controversy. And I was talking a little bit earlier about how accurate that human curve is, because that was done a long time ago. That human curve, and you've probably seen this in a bunch of bulletins, was done back in the 70s. They did someone a couple years ago did a research paper, and this was in 2006, and they put humans through the same test that they put the chickens through to see how well they could see those different colors. And what you can see is that red line, which is the humans, it actually kind of looks a lot more like a chicken than what the previous line did. And the reason that I bring this up here is because some lighting companies like to talk about Galilux or Chicken Lux or Clux. I'm not a huge fan of that. And we can have an open debate about that at some time, but my feeling is I'd rather have a simple light measurement than try to get it confused. And so the simpler it is in dealing with lighting, the easier, because we have enough challenges that we already don't know about versus trying to add another metric in there. There we go. Another thing about chickens, which is pretty cool, and many of you already know this, is chickens see light other than through their eyes. They can absorb light through their brain and detect it in the pineal gland and in the hypothalamus. And this is really important because this is one of the main ways that production is stimulated. That red light going through their brain helps them come into production and helps fire the right hormones that we need to lay as many eggs as possible. This is some research that's getting older now, but it's still pretty accurate. And this is the wavelength that penetrates the chicken's brain and how effective it is. And you can see, so those numbers on the bottom are the nanometers. You can see after about 600 nanometers, that goes way up. That's why we want red light for our chickens. And it doesn't have to be red, but there has to be red in it, like with these lights or with some of the other lights that are coming out. So you need red, whether it's broiler breeders, whether it's layers, and I believe whether it's for turkey breeders, you all need that red light for penetration into the brain. So now we get to the big question that we get a lot. And my colleague, Darren Eckert, who is our cage-free advisor, also gets this question a lot. Really, what bulb should I buy? And I try not to endorse any specific bulb because there's a lot of lighting companies out there, but I do have some general guidelines that I would recommend to all of you. First of all, we need to separate between what is the purpose of these bulbs, because you've got general bulbs and then you've got poultry-specific bulbs. We're all used to the general bulbs. Those are the ones that we find at the hardware store or at Amazon or Walmart, and those are the ones I have in my house. These bulbs are pretty inexpensive. You can buy a lot of them for your house, and if you have especially for floor houses, oftentimes these bulbs will work well because they have good light distribution, and you're able to, for an 8-foot or 10-foot high ceiling, get plenty of light down to where you need it. And you can typically get them either as a warm or a cool bulb, which is why it's important that we understand what those are. Then we have poultry-specific bulbs. There's a number of lighting companies that have popped up, and they provide a specific bulb for chickens or for turkeys or other livestock species. These new bulbs oftentimes have multiple spectrum options. For anyone who's installing lights right now, I would recommend that you get a bulb that has the option to switch spectrums because that'll help you with the behavior. They're designed to meet the electrical codes in barns, which is an underrated component of it. And oftentimes they have warranties that will actually cover you if those bulbs go out after anywhere from 3 to 8 years, which is helpful given the investment that you put into these houses. So what bulb should I choose? We've got a wide range. So some of these bulbs can be as inexpensive as $8 or $10. Some of them go up over $100 a bulb. That's a really big range to be able to fit into. Part of it is, are you renovating? Are you building new? If you're renovating, is it a complete gut, or are you just trying to work with the existing infrastructure? What kind of housing system? Any type of cage-free, and I think Darren would agree with this, at the very least in your aisle, whether you're building new or retrofitting, you need to have a multiple channel light in your aisle to allow you to have the most control over behavior and management. In the system, under the system, I think it's okay to go with warm light in the system, cool light under the system, but absolutely for the aisle. And then for floor houses as well, I would consider you to look into having some kind of light that can change, because that'll make your life a lot easier when you have to go in and manage the birds, pick those birds up. And then go with a bulb that has technical support. I'm not an electrical engineer. Darren and I have a lot of practical experience working with these lights, but ultimately if something goes wrong, you want the manufacturer of that light to be able to actually come out and help you, give you some real advice with it, because that's one of those things that's often left undone, that if there's an issue with the lights, who's there to fix it? And so we need to be able to have that kind of support. That's really important. And there we go. Any questions on lighting? Okay, everyone who had the questions, it was in the earlier presentation. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and thank you for listening to both presentations.